So now we've derived our marginal revenue curve from our demand curve for the monopolist. We did that with the perfect competitor. Now we've done it for the monopolist. When we looked at the perfect competitor, once we had developed our marginal revenue curve and demand curve, which was the same creature in that case, then we began to model it with our cost curves from our cost chapter, which at the time when we discussed the cost chapter, I said, you really want to get this one because it's just going to keep coming back our way. Well, here it comes again. We're taking the same steps. Now we're going to take our marginal revenue curve and our demand curve, and we're going to put them in the framework with our cost curve so that we can analyze what to expect from the monopolist in equilibrium in the short run. Here we go. You can use a capital Q because it's a monopolist and they face the entire market demand curve, which I'll start with as we did before here. Now, we just derived marginal revenue, and what do the marginal revenue curves look like? They're trapped inside of demand at a greater slope, something like that. I don't have all these numbers in the plotted points, but this is what they look like when we do, so I'm just doing it without them. Now, I'm going to bring my cost curves into this picture, and I need to think just a little bit about how I want this to look. Okay, I have it in mind now. I'll say this is average total cost. Generally, it's a parabola. That's pretty much what I have here. And now I want to draw marginal cost. Now, before I draw marginal cost, what do I have to remind myself of? Where does it cross average total cost? At the minimum of average total cost. So I need to make sure my marginal cost curve comes through at about the minimum. Something like that. These are all things that we've derived before in the chapter before last when we looked just at costs. I don't actually need average variable cost to analyze the monopolist. We could put that on there, but it's not usually done because it's not part of the analysis, the interesting stuff that we're going to see. So this is really all I need, and I know that is plenty. Now the question is, how's this firm doing? We have the information we need to answer that question. We really do. How is this firm doing? But to answer the question of how this firm is doing, we really need to think about what this firm is doing. In other words, if this is the structure they face, how would they handle it if they're profit maximizing? Profit maximizing firms of all of the types always produce at the same place, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's why I said those are the decision-making variables, the marginal things. Rational people think at the margin was one of our 10 principles. That marginal things are the decision-making variables because that tells us how the firm is going to react going forward or backwards because it's the cost or the revenue of the next unit. So where marginal revenue equals marginal cost is where the firm will produce. So that's right there. And by where the firm will produce, what I mean is the quantity that they'll choose to make as a profit maximizing firm. So now we have what they'll do. They'll produce that much. But what does that mean in the context of when I said, how are they doing? Well, can I see what their revenue is? Now that I know the quantity, what else do I need to know how much they're bringing in, what their revenue is? What's total revenue? Always has been, always will be, price times quantity. Well, if I have this quantity, do I know what the price is that they can get? I sure do, because they can get for this quantity what people are willing to pay for that quantity. Do I have that information in the graph? Yes, I do. That's what the demand curve is, the various quantities that consumers will be willing and able to purchase at various prices. For this quantity, the consumers are willing and able to purchase this price right here. So that becomes the market price. And now I also have total revenue because total revenue is equal to price times quantity, always and everywhere. And I have quantity, I have price, so this rectangle right here is the firm's total revenue. Now that's one component of profit. Profit, by the way, is always equal to total revenue minus total cost. Can I get total cost from this information over here? Of course I can. What could I use to figure out total cost? This is always a little bit of a puzzle, and it's sort of fun that way, if you let it be. Well, I only have two things related to cost: marginal cost and average total cost. Average total cost is a fancy way to say cost per unit. So I have cost per unit for all these different volumes of output, including the number of units that the profit maximizing firm will produce. So I have the cost per unit for that number of units right there. And this is just a number scale over here that are dollars. So I have the average total cost, which is cost per unit. So I have the cost per unit times the number of units they're going to make. So that means this rectangle right here represents total cost. Let me go back to that original question. How are they doing? This rectangle is total revenue. This rectangle is total cost. Which one's bigger? Total revenue is bigger than total cost. This is definitely a positive number. How positive is it? It's the difference right here. It's this rectangle. This rectangle right here is all economic profit for the monopolist. And that is an economic profit. That's above what the proprietor could otherwise be making because they face the entire market demand curve since they're the sole producer of the good. Now, for some reason that might bother people that the monopolist is making an economic profit, which I think is funny because when we explain how the perfect competitor makes zero economic profit, people kind of say, oh, but that doesn't make any sense. And then when we turn around and model how somebody can make an economic profit, they tend to say, well, that seems wrong because they're called a monopolist. And we're kind of primed to be negative about that, I think. I would just point out that there is a patent for someone, I believe, on the eastern shore of Maryland, might be Delaware, might not be either one, but I think it is, for contact lenses for chickens. By definition, that is a monopolist because they have this patent for contact lenses for chickens. I don't think they are the monopolists depicted in the movies, sipping brandy and smoking cigars. So, if we set aside our priors and investigate this for what it is, then we can look for the real issues here. The real issue here isn't that the monopolist is making a profit, an economic profit. The real issue is that there is deadweight loss when a monopoly exists. I know there's deadweight loss because along here in the demand curve, let me go ahead and get in a different color. In the demand, on the demand curve, you have people who are willing and able to pay a higher price right along here. All this segment of the demand curve right here. And the price is higher than they're willing and able to pay. So if you think back to consumer surplus, those are people who are out of the market. And that's something that the monopolist is incentivized to do in order to earn that rectangle of profit. But the monopolist would be willing and able to produce all of this along here, but won't produce it. So we have a loss of production of this triangle right here for which the monopolist does not benefit. So it's not I said a different color, but it actually looks the same. I promise it's a different color on the marker itself. So we have a loss of production for which no one is compensated. So we have a deadweight loss or an inefficiency of monopolist. And that is the challenge of monopoly to economists, is grappling with that market failure, that loss of efficiency due to the situation of monopoly. Now, I think I'm going to stop here because that is how the model works. And then I'll move into things like what we can do about that or what we might do about that, and maybe some other more subtle aspects of monopoly.